What's going on, everybody? We've broken down the running backs, the wide receivers of this upcoming draft class. But today, that's right, it is National Rookie Tight End Supermodel Day. And accordingly, we have the one, the only Dwain "The Rock" McFarland breaking down to who are going to be the biggest names and hopefully the biggest fantasy producers here before too long. So, Dwain, man, happy Tight End Day.
Happy tight end day, and happy getting to hang out on the beach this weekday to you, or week, I should say. Happy beach week to you, Hartitz. But look, guys, you have to know behind the scenes, like Ian, he could just take this week off, but he doesn't because he's a complete grinder. He's like, no, I'm going to go to the beach and we're going to record. So major hat tip to you, Ian, always representing.
Hey, man, I'm here to talk some tight ends and maybe, kill a couple of Kona big waves later, but not right now. We are still on coffee and accordingly these tight ends. So, Dwain, again, already gone through the running backs and wide receivers. We invite you guys to go check out those videos as well. But as we've done, at the start of those as well, just want to kind of get through exactly what the inputs are and what goes into this tight end supermodel. Because as we saw, a wide receiver didn't exactly have as big of an athleticism component. So, Dwain, what are the key inputs for this model and how does it differ from running backs and receivers?
Yeah, and real quick before I walk through the four, just like at a high level, there are really just two things we're looking for when we're deciding what inputs go into the model, whether we're talking about running back, wide receiver, tight end. The big thing is it has to really correlate to future fantasy success, right, in the NFL. And we're looking at the first 3 years to determine that. So once we isolate down to the actual values that really do show to be strong, then we cross-test them all against one another to see, is there signal between them? Really, we just want complementary components that give us a well-rounded view of a prospect. We don't want things that are really just counting the same thing over and over and over. And one of the biggest components, well, the biggest component in the model is draft capital value. So that's the number one thing we're testing against. So if we're looking at a production stat and it doesn't add any value as far as predicting the future for an NFL prospect versus draft capital alone, it doesn't go in the model. It's really as simple as that. So draft capital value is the starting point. Everything gets cross-tested against that. So that's the high level overview. But if you want to break down each component, we talked a little bit about draft capital value. One thing to note with this, we're not just talking about draft pick. What we've done is we've actually used a chart created by Chase Stewart. He took the Jimmy Johnson trade chart. Many of you have heard of that. And he actually put it into numbers and updated it for us. So what that means is pick 1 in the NFL draft versus pick 15, there is a huge drop off in the draft capital value. It looks like it's only 14 spots, but that 14 spots represents a lot of draft capital value. Vice versa, say you get to pick 100, go into pick 115, still only a 14 pick difference between those two, but at the same time, the drop off is much less. So basically early in round 1 to the end of round 1, end of round 2, the drop offs are much bigger. Once you get to the end of round 2, things tend to start to flatten out. And once you get to the 4th and 5th rounds, there's just not a huge difference in draft capital value. It's there, but it's not going to impact a player's grade near as much as you've got a player pick 17 in round 1 versus pick 36, the 4th pick of round 2. So that's something to keep in mind. And just doing that alone really helped the model out. Because the gold standard is really draft pick. Can you make a model that's stronger than draft pick? And by going to draft pick value or draft capital value, it actually improves your model a lot. And then you have production. And production is pretty straightforward. We're really looking at two things here. We're looking at receiving yards per team pass attempt, and it's an adjusted number for a player's career. And when you hear the word adjusted, what we're doing is we're normalizing for strength of schedule, for their teammates, for their age/class, because what we want to be able to do is really compare the production in an apples to apples fashion. And you guys know how this works. You get to play, tight end in the MAC against a lesser conference. You have less competition on your team. You're going to be much more likely to get on the field earlier in your career, and you're going to be much more likely to put up fantasy points or production, yards, receptions, touchdowns, those sort of things, because you're doing it against lesser competition. So the model normalizes and accounts for all those things. It knows the conference you played in. It knows the schedule that you played, all those sort of things. So really normalizing. And the big one is really teammates. Like if you play for Ohio State, right, the number of the competition you have is like all first rounders, around you, right? I know. I was just throwing that out there just for you, Ian, so you can get ready to go have your Kona Big Wave. So that's the way we handle production. The other component in production is actually the quarterback rating when targeting that tight end, and that again is a career number. And so just remember, complementary. RIPTA is really while it's using yards, there's going to be overlap between the two, but it's really looking at what did you do in the context of your offense, run heavy, pass heavy, all the competition you face, all those things are coming in. But when we really isolate down to the quarterback rating for the tight end when targeted, that's simply just saying, okay, once you got your opportunities, what did you do with it? And so those are two elements that are really complementary to one another. And then film really quickly, we just go to NFL.com. We're using the grades from Lance Zierlein. He's got those published way back. I've tested them back to 2014. They are one of the strongest components in the model. Lance has actually done a really good job. So we're using him for that film assessment to come together with production. And then finally, athleticism. Like you mentioned, Ian, not in the model for wide receiver, not because it doesn't matter necessarily, but because NFL draft capital is already accounting for it. It's not additive to NFL draft capital. But for tight end, Ian, this is actually surprisingly the number one position where athleticism matters the most. And we're using speed score, which is combining a player's weight with their 40 time. And so this is the position where it carries the absolute most signal. So speed score, very important for tight ends.
And I feel like, just again, based on the nature of tight end, that does make sense because running backs, wide receivers, you need to have that high level of athleticism just to be on the field in the first place. But a tight end, if you don't have it, maybe you can still service as, a blocker, maybe more of a fullback type. But again, to be the pass catcher, the guy we want to target in fantasy, yeah, we do want the high speed scores.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting about another thing about what you just brought up, and I won't go on it too long, but when you typically look at the tight ends taken in rounds 1, 2 of the NFL drafts, they're mostly the receiving prospects, right? And so once you get to rounds 3, 4, 5, 6, you start to mix in the guys that may be more, we're going to use them as an extra blocker on our team. Now, these are guys that get significant, they get like second and third contracts in the NFL. So not degrading them, like they're valuable to NFL teams. They're just not that valuable to us in fantasy. But the nice thing is typically when a team invests a first or a second rounder in a tight end, these days, they typically are of the receiving variety.
And accordingly, again, taking all these factors and really getting us one handy dandy, supermodel score that will be between 50 and 100. So Dwain, between 90 to 100, those are your quote unquote elite players. There have only been 2 since 2018. One Kyle Pitts and, much more cooler Brock Bowers from 80 to 89. Those are your great players. There have been 5 since 2018. 2 guys from this very class. Hint, hint. More on them in just a bit. A lot more in the good category where, again, we have 17 guys since 2018. So, under 70, Dwain, not that we haven't seen a hit. We do have the 6% top 9, as you guys can see on our handy dandy graphic right here. But really, man, if you aren't going to be 80 or above, not looking all that great for your fantasy chances.
Yeah, really big drop off at all the positions once you go below 70. But man, you can really see it at tight end because we also talk about the averages, right? The average fantasy points per game in the first 3 years of a player graded between 90 and 100 is 12.2. Yes, thank you, Brock Bowers, helping pull that up. But Kyle Pitts also was a serviceable top 6 tight end. And then if you look at that grade of 80 to 89, 7.7 fantasy points, 70 to 79, an average of 6.9. And man, then you drop down to 3.2. Once you get into that range of 60 to 70 and 1.2 if you grade between 50 and 60. So yeah, it drops off pretty quickly once you get below that threshold of 70 for your supermodel rating at tight end.
Last thing, Dwain, again, class as a whole, we've kind of done this at running back and wide receiver before getting into it. How does tight end stack up to some pass additions? Because even though we have said there maybe isn't that one just overall incredible elite group, really at any position, for this draft, tight end maybe relative at least to running back and wide receiver, stacking up nicely.
Yeah, 2023 is the strongest class we have since 2018. That was the Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, and Michael Mayer class. Obviously, so far, Laporta really the only one like to come out of that and really do a ton. But if you look at this year's class, Ian, and I went back and I just looked at the top 3 prospects from each class going back to 2018 and looking at the average of their supermodel rating, it's an 81 for this class across Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, and Harold Fannin Jr. That ranks second behind only the 2019 class, which had a top 3 of TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, and rest in peace, not literally, but fantasy-wise, Irv Smith. Like, we tried. We kept trying. We kept trying to hold on for Irv Smith. Didn't necessarily happen. So, again, this is from a prospect standpoint. This is really the second best class that we've got since 2018. Now, how will it exactly work out? There's a range of outcomes on all these guys. That's whenever we talk about the table and the hit rates. But what we'll do as we walk through each prospect, I've actually tightened those down, right, to really look at a tighter range around the players based on their supermodel rating. So we'll walk through a range of outcomes for each of these players to give folks a better idea, because the key is, like, the model, like, don't get hung up on a player being 1 point, one rating point ahead of the guy below them or behind, same vice versa. Really what you're doing is you're looking to group players and then see if there are places in the market, best ball, dynasty, redraft, whatever the case may be, where these players are just too far apart and where they're getting drafted. Because what the model is really telling us is these players have very similar hit rates. One may be slightly better than the other, but if you can get two guys with really similar hit rates and one of them's going 20 picks later in best ball, like, that's the kind of situation that we really want to use the model to attack.
By the way, Dwain, Irv Smith, still only 26 years old, okay? Let's not write him off just yet, all right? We've seen older tight ends make more with less. But with all that said, guys, let's go ahead and get into... That's what I'm saying, man. We've seen the late breakouts here. Also looking at you, Mr. Noah Fant, as well. But all that heartbreak aside, let's get into some more promising prospects, specifically the headliners of the 2025 NFL draft class. Kicking things off, Dwain, with our Tier 1 and Tier 2 performers. I'm sure if you guys have looked at a single mock draft, you are well aware of Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren. Also, though, Harold Fannin from Bowling Green, shout out Ohio, and the Falcons standing in there as our Tier 2 option. So we'll talk about Mr. Fannin in a couple minutes. But really, Dwain, it has been, perceived, and I would agree with the notion that this is a 2 tight end class. Just how close did Loveland and Warren wind up finishing in the supermodel?
Really close. Overall rating of 85 for Loveland, but he was ahead of Tyler Warren at 83. And it's honestly pretty significant given the fact that Tyler Warren is expected to go inside the top 10 picks of the NFL draft. And we're talking about Loveland being someone that probably goes somewhere between 15 and 20 in this draft class. So remember how important draft capital is, and it's the number one input in the model. So Loveland really had to do a lot of things to rank ahead of Ty Warren as far as coming out ahead in the supermodel. And one of the big things, Ian, really is his production score. When you look at Loveland and what he did, he had a production rating of 83. That came out ahead of Tyler Warren. We'll talk more about him in a second, but he was also really close in the film rating. He was at an 88 and Tyler Warren was at a 90. So keeping it really close in that film rating, but then outdoing Tyler Warren as far as the production goes is the key. And the big part of that really for Loveland is the fact that, Tyler Warren didn't break out until the end of his career. In fact, he didn't really do much at all until his 5th season at Penn State. We'll talk more about maybe why that occurred for Warren, but the bottom line is for Loveland right now, this is a guy that broke out really as a sophomore and then had a great junior season. So you go back and look historically at the hit rates around these players, and that's why we adjust RIPTA for age and class as well. And if you look at it, if you look at Loveland, came in at the 68th percentile in career adjusted RIPTA. That's the 7th best mark since 2018. If you look at his career targeted QB rating, 56th percentile at a 94.3. So above the 50th percentile in both of those buckets. You look at his career target share, even though this doesn't necessarily calculate in the model, like it's something I still look at, an 18% for him. That's in line with Brock Bowers, who was at a 19%. People hear the name Brock Bowers and they would guess for his career he was at a 30% target share or something at Georgia. He wasn't. He was at a 19%. Sam Laporta was at a 19%. Trey McBride was at a 17%. So Loveland right there. And this guy, Ian, was an absolute target magnet against man coverage, which you don't see for a lot of tight ends. It really is. That means you're getting some man coverage from defenses that recognize you're the guy to take away, and your quarterback's still throwing you the ball. A 27% targets per route run against zone coverage, 24% targets per route run against man coverage. If you look across this class, there's only 2 other players that were better than that, and it was Harold Fannin Jr., and then it was Brant, I don't even know if I'm saying his name right, Kuth. Kuithe. So sorry, guys, if I'm mispronouncing it. The guy's like 80 years old. He didn't do it until he was later in his career. So Loveland really showed, right, that he can do this in both facets, whether he's talking about facing man coverage or facing zone coverage. So really, really strong for him from that regard. And so all those things point to someone that can really hopefully take that production he had in college, and that's going to translate over to what we see in the NFL.
Really strong, just regardless of that age factor. But again, once you add that in, it really does become that much more impressive. Nearly 2 years younger than Tyler Warren. My man's isn't legally allowed to drink Kona Big Wave just yet, Dwain. So happy early birthday to Colston Loveland. He will be turning 21 here on Wednesday, April 9th. But I do think there's almost, just we've talked about, again, his ability as a pass catcher. And that is what we ultimately care about most in fantasy land, of course. But there's almost this, misconception about what he can do as a blocker. I mean, if you guys have been like me and unfortunately had to watch, Michigan Wolverines football and how they run over everyone for the better part of the last half decade. I mean, you cannot play tight end at Michigan and just be this, finesse Dalton Kincaid sort of player out here. We've seen Loveland go in there and actually emerge, I think, as a very, very qualified run blocker. And don't have to take my word for it. Love all the stuff Nate Tice does over at Yahoo Sports. And he had a great side-by-side piece out talking about Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren. And he actually came away more impressed with Loveland just straight up relative to Warren when it came to actual just pure run blocking ability. Even mentioned him getting better as last season went along, despite playing through that shoulder injury. So really impressive stuff from Loveland. And just Dwain, again, I don't expect everyone, it's April after all, to just have their complete, just viewpoint on these prospects yet. But when I, just kind of hearing other people talk about him, you think of him more as the finesse, tweener type. This dude's 6'6", 248 pounds, all right? It's only 8 pounds less than Tyler Warren. I mean, Loveland does have that, size, the blocking ability, receiving ability to be that every down tight end from day one. I know there's been the popular pick, hey, let's get him back with Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, perhaps at pick 22. I mean, if we have Loveland set up as Justin Herbert's legit number 1 tight end, number 2 pass game option in the entire offense, the ceiling for a rookie year, man, could be quite high.
Yeah, absolutely. And Zierlein echoed, looking at the film grade for Zierlein overall, it's his 5th highest. So he really likes him. When I say 5th highest, going all the way back in the data to 2014 that I have, there's a lot of good tight ends. So some people kind of lose the fact because Tyler Warren is ahead of Loveland on most boards. I think they're thinking of Loveland as being like this distant second. Supermodel likes him first, but let's just say we want to group them and call them the same. Just don't sleep on Loveland. He's got a lot more upside than people think. Now, Lance did call out his blocking. He sees him as being someone that could eventually be average in the NFL. So it wasn't quite to the same point as Nate Tice, maybe in what he thought in his evaluation of his run blocking grades. But the other thing I dug into, Ian, is his career weighted PFF run block for Loveland, 52.1. That fell into the 21st percentile since 2018. Not ideal, but what you have to remember is Sam Laporta was at a 56.1 for his career. Cole Kmet was at a 57.1. Those guys both overcame that really early to earn full-time roles. Laporta literally year 1 became a full-time tight end. Now, we do have examples of guys that have struggled a little bit more on that front, and Mike Gesicki is a good example. He came in with a 50.5 for his career run blocking grade, and then if you looked at Kyle Pitts, he was at a 51.3, and we've seen his playing time fluctuate throughout his career. Maybe some of that comes back to matchup. So there's a little bit on each side of it, but I think the main thing is if an NFL team is going to take a tight end in round 1, they're not going to care, Ian. They're just not going to worry about it. For the most part, they're going to get them out there, and they want to use them for their ability in the passing game, even if that means they have to suffer a little bit along the way with their ability as a run blocker and let them really grow into that aspect of their position over time.
And again, blocking stuff, okay, great. Receiving ability really is what his calling card. And man, the fact that we saw Loveland average 58 yards per game with those quarterbacks in Michigan last season, that might as well have been, 110 out there catching passes from Alex Orji and, Davis, whatever the freaking name is. God, just the hurt memories I get talking about these Wolverines, Dwayne, do not end. But okay, I know. Play style, okay, I've loved seeing the Evan Ingram comp. You've actually brought that name up a couple of times. Tyler Eifert is another good one who, we saw him have that, 13, 14 touchdown season a few years in. So I think play style-wise, those guys can make some sense. What comps are you getting, though, Dwayne, from the supermodel relative to maybe the production we can expect from Loveland here in 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, and just to kind of to level set here for folks, how I handle coming up with the comps in the supermodel it's really simple, right? I'm rating down, I'm narrowing the field down to players that had a similar production score, a similar film score, similar athleticism score, and similar draft capital, right? And so I just try to tighten that down. And the three players that come up, and that's not always stylistic, remember, because you might have had a really good film grade and a really good production grade, and you might have been 6'3" or you might have been 6'6". It doesn't really matter. I don't worry so much about the size. Now, if I have a bunch of names in the group, then I can start to slice a little bit more, even like more of a stylistic comp within the first comp group. But with tight ends, it's pretty tough because we don't get a lot of really good tight ends that come out. So looking back to 2018, this is mostly based on players that were around them with the four factors we're talking about. So Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, and Mike Gesicki were Loveland's closest comps in the model. If you look at the hit rates for players in his range, 20% of them went on to give a top 6 finish within their first 3 seasons. 40% gave you a top 9 finish within their first 3 years, and 80% of them became a top 12 tight end. So you're looking at a guy that's a near lock to be a tight end 1 in fantasy football within their first 3 years. I think he's more like a borderline mid-range tight end 1, and you still have a little bit of that high-end tight end 1 upside with Loveland.
I'll tell you what, man, Mike Gesicki, but not just a pure disaster as a blocker. That's a heck of a football player right there. So feeling very good about Colston Loveland. And again, takes a lot in these models for someone with less draft capital to actually finish above someone with higher. So, Loveland really does have, a lot of pieces of the puzzle going his way there. But let's stick with our tier 1 and the other star of the show, and that is Penn State tight end Tyler Warren and all the great things he did during the course of his career. That said, Dwain, as you mentioned, really was a late breakout, but what a breakout it was. 104 catches for 1,233 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2024. As a receiver, he was also lethal on the ground. They used him as a wildcat quarterback a lot, wound up racking up 218 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. Number 1, Dwain, in the entirety of Division I football in yards per carry among non-quarterbacks. So love the advanced rushing numbers. You look at him out there. I mean, this dude, you do not want to meet him in the open field. Where's number 44? Because his dad used to show him John Riggins film as a kid and said that's how he wanted him to run. So again, really fun player to watch out there. But, we can add the caveats that, yes, he was playing behind NFL starters, Theo Johnson, Bretton Strange, Pat Freiermuth. But that said, Dwain, going to be 23 in May. And when you do need to pick between 2 great players, that can't be the differentiator.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, his final season really did help him, even though it was year 5. And so the way the model works, it does not give a ton of weight to year 5 for a tight end. It gives some weight. It gives more weight to years 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for Tyler Warren to even show up with a 72 production rating is kind of a testament to how good his final season was. Ian, he had a 32% target share and a 2.81 RIPTA. That's the 6th best single season RIPTA in the history of the supermodel going back to 2018. So as far as standalone seasons, regardless of what age he is, like, he kicked ass. Tyler Warren really kicked ass in his final year, and it did help him in the model. But at the same time, because Loveland did some of those things sooner, that's why he comes in with a supermodel rating of 83 versus an 85 for Loveland. Now, having said all that, NFL teams love this guy. Right now, if we look at mock drafts where he's projected to go, it will be the 3rd highest draft capital rating at an 89 since 2018. So this is a guy that a lot of people love. If you look at his film rating from Lance Zierlein, it is really good as well. It's his 3rd highest for a tight end since 2018 with a grade of 6.77. And you look at Zierlein, he echoes some of the things you talked about that kind of go back to the John Riggins, comment. He calls him, he's got best player on the field energy, right? And we just love to see that. When you see a guy like Travis Kelce, he's got best player on the field energy. We all know what that looks like. We may not always be able to quantify it, but you just see certain players, and when you watch them play, you're just like, man, this guy's on another level with certain aspects of his game. And Zierlein sees Warren as a player that has a chance to become one of the best tight ends in the league. Obviously, that's where the grade comes from, 6.77. So again, mostly the issue here is the fact that it took so long for him to break out. You mentioned it, play with Pat Freiermuth, Brenton Strange, Zach Kuntz, Theo Johnson. The issue is the model's accounting for that, But the way the model goes for accounting for that, it doesn't look at their NFL draft capital. It looks at really, did they hit certain thresholds in their RIPTA? Meaning, hey, did you play with other players on the team that had really high RIPTAs and were earning a lot of targets, getting a lot of yards? And the problem is, none of those guys, even though they were drafted by the NFL, really were super high-end producers at the level of college. So while the model is giving him some credit for the fact that he had to play with those other tight ends that became eventually became NFL draft picks, it's not giving him a huge bump. It's only a slight bump. So if you look at him, he ends up in the 30th percentile for his career adjusted RIPTA. It would have been 21st percentile before making the adjustment for the teammates. So he's not getting a huge bump. He's only getting a little bit of a bump there. But I will say this, Ian. Again, the complementary metric that we like to look at here is the career quarterback targeted rating. So when he was actually targeted by his quarterback, it comes in at the 79th percentile. So that's the other thing that's pushing that production rating up to a 72. Guys, remember, everything is on a scale of 50 to 100. So slightly below the mid-range. But I mean, that 79th percentile, that's one of the best tight ends we've seen. So while it took him a while to break out, when he did have the ball in his hands, this guy was absolutely phenomenal. And when you turn on the film and you just watch him with the ball in your hands, and I'm not a film expert, but I will tell you this, it's very fun to watch.
And he kept doing it really in some of the biggest games that Penn State had last year. I mean, the USC game was just diabolical, man. 17 catches, 224 yards, and a touchdown. And the touchdown, he lined up as a center on this wild, trick play they had going on there. 94 total yards on 7 touches against my Ohio State Buckeyes. 96 yards on 8 touches against Notre Dame. 2 touchdowns versus Boise State in the playoffs. Another good game against Oregon, the Big Ten championship, a few weeks before that. So again, really did shine brightest when the lights were, brightest as well. So good stuff there from Warren, again, as a receiver and as even a rusher. And accordingly, Dwayne, it is kind of tough to just immediately look at him and say, okay, how is he going to fit into an NFL offense? Because on the one hand, he can do everything, but he's also not necessarily this, pure going to run, your option routes like maybe a Colston Loveland type. So accordingly, we've had, kind of just, I don't want to say a wide array of potential draft spots because everyone kind of expects him to go inside the top 15. But I'm not so sure that, again, even if you do believe he is the clear-cut number 1 tight end in this class, that we can get behind him as this immediate fantasy star, because I've been seeing the Jets at number 7, Dwayne, a good amount. The Saints at number 9. That's where Thor had him going in his latest mock draft. The Colts down there at pick 14. I feel like the Colts are kind of his floor. But, again, if he goes to any of those teams, I'm not so sure I'm going to be lining up to spend, a top 8 overall tight end pick on this guy in 2025 redraft land.
Yeah, I mean, we know the landing spot's going to matter. We've got some quarterback challenges, some of those places that you just named. Like the Saints, honestly, would probably be my favorite. Because, I mean, we know we've got Rashid Shaheed coming back. We know we've got Chris Olave. But Derek Carr, I feel like at least could be stable. Man, you land with the Colts and how much they like to rotate tight ends. Plus, you got Anthony Richardson. That would definitely matter. But just purely focusing like on the talent profile that we have from Warren, 67% of his comps went on to have a top 12 finish within their first 3 seasons in the NFL. The closest comps to him in the model, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, and Cole Kmet. And if I were to call out like one potential hole in his game that's beyond like the model, pushing him down because of him being such a late breakout, it's really the fact that he didn't work vertical that much in college. Only 7% of his targets came 20-plus yards downfield, and that actually matches the assessment from Zerline as he looked at the film. He had concerns about his ability to work vertically. Now, sometimes you land in an offense like the Jaguars last year, and it doesn't matter. Like Evan Ingram's just running drag route year before as well, just running drag routes, and because the other complementary wide receivers are clearing the other things out, it all works out fine. You quickly become the second read on something. You catch a ball for 5 yards, you turn it into 10. Warren would certainly have the ability to do something like that. It would be similar to what Evan Ingram brought to the table as far as run after the catch. The question is, does he land in a spot where like that role is readily available? I always like players, if I can, that can unlock all areas of the field, and Loveland did show also to be able to do that a little bit more. But I'll say this, if Warren lands in the perfect spot where they just ask him to do what he does well, like he could easily just outscore Loveland by a lot. He has the ability as far as run after the catch, toughness, all those things in the right landing spot to really be an elite fantasy tight end.
Evan Ingram, that low ADOT, again, receiver who can hopefully catch a lot of passes just like Tyler Warren did last year. I throw David Njoku kind of into a similar bucket where, yeah, not exactly going to be going out there creating a ton of separation downfield, but obviously a very big tight end. He can win, turn those 50-50 balls into 70-30 propositions and then make a lot happen after the catch, which, again, really has been Warren's calling card. So, yeah.
One final thing I would say on this, like, say you're in a dynasty rookie draft. Let's say you're sitting at pick 8 and you're thinking about taking Tyler Warren, but you could probably trade down to pick 12 and get Loveland, and you're going to pick up draft capital, you picking up an extra pick or something. I'm doing that. Like, I really do like Warren. Again, the model has Loveland ahead, but you can look at them as being the same tier. They're two rating points apart, guys. So if you like Tyler Warren, don't let the model change your mind on that. You can still take him over Loveland. But what I would say the model is telling you to do is if you're at a spot where you can drop back 3 or 4 spots and still get Loveland and pick up additional assets, like, the model is telling you should do that because the range of outcomes are so similar between the two players.
I'm with you, man. Team Loveland, at least for now. Dwayne, I mean, we've never been wrong on a player in April and then seen that change as the season gets going. So we'll see what happens there. But yes, as things stand at this point in time, Team Loveland here on the Fantasy Life Show. Let's go ahead and move on into tier 2, though, Dwayne, where we have one man standing alone, and that is Bowling Green's finest, Harold Fannin Jr. Now, there's been a lot of discourse around Fannin because you don't usually see tight ends, Dwayne, lead the entirety of Division I football in college in receiving yards, which he just did. So it was a ridiculous season, 117 catches, 1,555 yards, and 10 touchdowns. 1,555 yards for a tight end, Dwayne. This is absolutely wild, but of course, America cannot have nice things, so we've been trying to pick apart his profile. Oh, he's done it against the MAC. Forget the 2 huge games he had against Penn State and Texas A&M. We'll focus on the other ones, all right? He's done it against the MAC. He's not big enough. Oh, he only ran a 4.740. Look, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be paying attention to potential red flags, but the green flag is ridiculous production, so I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, look, this guy ranks as the 9th best player in the supermodel going back to 2018 at the tight end position. His rating is a 77, and to your point, a lot of it is
what if you remove draft capital?
Yeah, if you remove draft capital, he would go even higher. He would be actually, I got to look over at it. I have this now, so you're going to ask me. He would be 4th all time in the model if you wasn't using draft capital. And I will say this, the supermodel without draft capital is actually more predictive than NFL draft capital by itself. So for running back and tight end, that's a number you will hear me talk about. If you guys want to read the articles over at fantasylife.com, you can see them all for free, but I'll mention the non-draft capital version of the model because it actually has performed really strongly. Not as much so at wide receiver. It's been good, but basically equivalent to NFL draft capital. But because the models have been so strong without draft capital for running back and tight end, it is a number that I do reference. And so that's why Ian brings it up here. And that is an important thing. And it does come down, to the production. Like, that's just a massive part of it. There's no getting around it for Harold Fannin Jr. A 100 production rating. That's the best all time in the Super Bowl. 99.9 percentile as far as adjusted career receiving yards per team pass attempt. And then his career targeted quarterback rating, 79th percentile at a 125. So checking both of those boxes in a massive way. If you look at that record-breaking production, it places him among like some really elite company, Ian. If we just isolate on the production component here for a second, here are the 5 closest prospects to what he did. Brock Bowers had a 96. Okay, Fannin's at a 100. Michael Mayer, who I contend is still a good tight end. He just happens to now play with Brock Bowers. Hey,
free Michael Mayer.
You like going and trading for these players that are backups on other team. Like, pull your head out of your you-know-what. Go trade for Michael Mayer, right? Not Jonathan Mingo. Like, this is not rocket science. Even a nerd like me that just lives in my mom's basement, just kidding. Like, I do have a house, guy. But Michael Mayer, like, is a name I would be targeting if I was an NFL team and I needed a tight end. I think he would be the 3rd or 4th best prospect in this class. Isaiah Likely is the other name who came in at a 90. Hunter Bryant, that's a bust, 87. But the other one is Trey McBride. So Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, who got buried, by Bowers. We've seen Isaiah Likely, when given his opportunities, what he's been able to do. And then, Trey McBride, the highest paid tight end in the NFL now after last week. So that's really good company. That is fantastic company. So this guy's just an absolute menace from a receiving profile standpoint, Ian, whether you want to talk about getting open, doing against man, doing against zone, his ability to produce yards after the catch, all of those things. And I see some of these film grades where it's like, oh, he's just too tight around his hips. And I'm like, I don't care. I really don't care. Like when I look at this stuff. And the beauty is, remember, guys, the supermodel is already accounting for that, for the fact that he played in the MAC. It's counting that against him. His strength of schedule rating is a 63 in the supermodel, and the production score is already adjusting for the fact that he played against a lower level of competition.
And I just wonder, Dwayne, because I've been guilty of this before. Like, you get so used to watching wide receiver tapes sometimes that then when you go to tight end, it's like, yeah, they're not moving the same way because they got an extra 30, 40 pounds on their frame and they play a different position out here. So with Fannin, not the biggest man in the world, 6'3", 241 pounds, which is still gargantuan in the grand scheme of things, but not quite as tall or large as Loveland or Warren, but that's not small. And we have the 40 time that, again, wasn't blazing. He was clocked in out of 4.71, but here's a list of tight ends, Dwayne, who were at least, 0.05 faster, so just a little bit, 4.66, or just slower than Fannin, okay? Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, Hunter Henry, Tucker Kraft, Pat Fryer, Jake Ferguson, Isaiah Likely, Dalton Kincaid, and there's even more to this list, but I will not bore you guys with that. So I don't think these are red flags. We're trying to, again, pick holes in the profile because we almost just can't believe this guy has put up these level of numbers. So what are we really missing here, man? His relative athletic score, okay, 297th amongst 1,300 players. That's still really good. It's not elite. It's not number 1, number 5 or whatever. But, man, if we can find a day 2 home for this man with a number 2, number 3 pass game option, why can't he boom?
Yeah, the 35th percentile speed score of 97.9. It's pulling him down in the model, but it just can't. I mean, it doesn't erase everything else. And again, that's the beauty of the supermodel. It's not like everything is this binary thing. We're looking at the collective way all of these components come together for the player. So he is getting pulled down for that speed score. It is not ideal. But at the same time, I do think people are over knocking him, Ian, for some of the other things. You hear, oh, he didn't play in line, which is true. Only 36% of his snaps came in line. But if we look at the college game, when we look at tight ends that have gone in the first round, going back to 2018, 42% of the time they lined up in line. So he's essentially in the same bucket. He's at 36%. They're at 42%. People think of Brock Bowers and they think he lined up in line like 80% of the time. No, he didn't. He was at 42%. So when you start to look at that, and then the other thing is like, oh, he's 6'3", 241. That's not big enough. The average weight of a first-round tight end since 2018 is 249 pounds. He's 8 pounds off of that. And so I think once you start to blend all these things together, you can't just dismiss how productive this player was. Okay. And I feel like that's what's happening. Well, too small, didn't run fast, played in the MAC. And the beauty again is the model's already accounting for all of those things. And he's getting dinged for the things that have shown to matter for future fantasy success. So I love him. And I think he's falling too far. Like right now, man, since he ran on Underdog, he's going pick 206, which essentially means he's not even getting drafted in a lot of these drafts. Give me Harold Fannin exposure at the very end of underdog drafts right now. In rookie dynasty ADP, thanks DLF, tight end 3 right now, but he's pick 30. So he's going in round 3 of most of these rookie drafts. So I think he's way undervalued. I think he's one of the most undervalued players on the board right now as far as from a fantasy perspective. And if you look at his supermodel rating between 70 and 85, Ian, remember he came in at a 77, but this is me tightening that band down again around the player. We've seen that 19 times. 42% of those prospects went on to give you a top 12 campaign in their first 3 years. So we're not saying like this guy's a slam dunk, but he does offer the type of profile that the ceiling really is big. So 16% of those players that ended up making it into the top 12, well, 16% of those were tight end 1s. So 16% of his comps were tight end 1. So I think this is a guy that maybe you swing and you miss, but the ceiling is you could still have a top 6 tight end. And here's my thing. As long as if he goes in round 2, Ian, I'm going to feel really good about it. Because I think if a team's going to spend a round 2 pick on this player, they're going to see him as a receiver first. I don't think you want to spend a second round pick on a guy that you want to get on the field for 30% of plays. right, to be your tight end 2 and 12 personnel. Like, I just don't think that makes sense. If he falls to round 3 or 4, I think you're in much bigger risk of that. But if a team does jump up and take him in round 2, I think that's absolutely huge. Not just because it'll help him in the model, because draft capital matters so much, but just seeing the conviction a team has around him, that will help me in my belief that they've got a vision for him, which is not as a blocker. It's as a guy that can go out there and do damage. And here's the other thing. I joined another show last week at the end of the week, and Rich from Dynasty Island, he said, hey, he goes, yeah, great. So this guy's not a good blocker. He's still a better blocker than any slot receiver. And so if he can be as good as at a receiver as a slot wide receiver, it's still going to be a plus for you in the blocking game. And you bring probably a potential mismatch on the field where teams have to decide, do we want to have a linebacker out there now because he could block up a corner really easy, or is that too much of a mismatch and we have to put a corner on him? Well, now that's a mismatch in the run game because you can actually run a run play. And I feel pretty good about Harold Fannin blocking a guy that's, 5'10", 180. I think he's going to win that battle. So I think there's a lot of layers to this. The comps in the supermodel, Ian, are Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and the bust is Harrison Bryant.
Last thing, Dwayne, the blocking aspect. Are we just saying, oh, he played at Bowling Green, he must suck at blocking? PFF, I appreciate them. I'm not saying they're the Bible with everything. This dude was their 10th highest graded run blocker last year among 154 qualified D1 tight ends. Like, that's better than anyone we're going to talk about on this show. And yes, guys, if you go into Twitter and you actually search Harold Fannin blocking, you see clips of him kicking out Abdul Carter against Penn State, actually making good blocks in space. Like, is this just an assumption? Like, where did that fall in terms of like his career blocking grade? Is it really that big of a red flag, even analytically?
No. Again, 64th percentile, 69.6. And as soon as you throw out what everyone responds with, well, it was the MAC and he was in the slot. And that's why earlier I kind of went on my diatribe around, they all play from the slot, guys. All the guys getting drafted in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft since 2018, they're not lining up in line. Like TJ Hawkinson is like last of the Mohicans. Like, he is one of the last ones to actually do that. So it's not the issue people are making it out to be. And so that 64th percentile is actually pretty good. And I will say, my blocking grades, I do not adjust for strength of schedule. That's something that I could look into doing next week. So the level of competition was lower. But the bottom line is, if you're getting to block from that position, you're going to get more favorable angles on the linebackers, different things. So, like, how much does it matter? I think it's just being completely blown out of proportion.
Right. And I'm not saying he's a 10 out of 10 as a blocker, but he's also probably not a 0 out of 10. And when the receiving is as good as it is, maybe we can live with that a little bit. All right. So now we do have some more times to talk about who are not going to be as complete of prospects as the big 3 that we talked about, but maybe still some good diamonds in the rough. Right after, though, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you know you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You got to wait till it's done. Oh.
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
It's tier 3 time. We are talking tight end 2 prospects with slim tight end 1 upside. And Dwayne, I know we talk a lot about draft capital, and I'm going to have an article out in a few weeks kind of going through just how dire it can be for guys that are not selected on day 1 or day 2. And tight end really does seem to hit the hardest. That said, maybe these guys can actually surprise us in terms of where they're going to be drafted. So kicking things off with LSU tight end Mason Taylor. That's right, son of Jason Taylor. And even his uncle is Zach Thomas out here talking about great NFL bloodlines. What do you make of Mason Taylor, Dwayne? A guy who, hey, as we saw recently, Daniel Jeremiah's number 32 overall prospect.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that's a pure projection prospect. You heard us talk about that with the running backs and wide receivers. What's really carrying him, his calling card, is the fact that he's got this 81 film rating. When you look at what Lance Zierlein wrote about him, it's a 6.4, sees him as a good starter within 2 years in the league. So he sees him as a guy that still is ascending, right? He hasn't fully reached his ceiling. That's another cool thing about including these grades. Not only have they really shown to be predictive, so they earn their way into the model, but one cool thing that Lance is doing is he's not just grading based on what he saw on the film and that's static. He's also looking for these traits that could unlock more at the next level of the NFL. He talked about he talked about Taylor, and he said, has the ability to become a high volume target for a team looking to upgrade the F tight end spot. And he gave him a comp to Dallas Goedert. So production, not great, Ian. Career adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt, 32nd percentile. Career targeted quarterback rating, a little better, 59th percentile. So getting above the middle on that. He had a 98 QB rating over his career. If you look at him and compare him to second round picks historically that have had a similar production rating to what he had, Cole Kmet, Mike Gesicki, and Luke Musgrave are the names that come up in the model. If we just want to zoom out and say, okay, let's talk about fantasy finishes here, 21% ended up being a top 12 fantasy tight end within the first 3 years. So guys, we've definitely taken a big step down from the top prospects we were just talking about. These are almost more in the dart throw territory. But stylistically, if once we have actually layer in and look at some of the other things, Cole Kmet is a really good name in the model. Cade Otton's another one. And if you think about those guys, Ian, when have they played their best? They've played their best essentially when other weapons around them on their teams went down. We saw it for Cade Otton last year once Chris Godwin left the team, and it was now down to Mike Evans as well as Jalen McMillan, who was a rookie last season. We actually saw Cade Otton step up in a big way. So he was capable of taking on more, but when the offense was fully healthy, they weren't designing that stuff for him. The quarterbacks are like, I got Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Well, if we go back to Cole Kmet, really the same thing. He was kind of ascending, and then they add DJ Moore. Then you get Keenan Allen was really the big thing, plus Rome Odunze last year. He became the forgotten man in the offense. So I would say about a player like this, still ascending, so he is a projection pick, but whenever you think about the landing spots, ideally if he lands on a team with only one other real target earner, that could make us feel a little bit better about him. Lands on a loaded team, that could be really a problem for him.
Hey, doesn't turn 21 until May. If there was going to be a college where, tight end's probably not going to get too much run out there in terms of design routes, probably LSU teams that had Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. to get the football too. So we'll see. But yeah, if he does end up maybe sneaking into the end of round one or early portions of round two, certainly could see him again being someone on the rise there in rookie drafts. Let's talk about Oregon tight end Terrence Ferguson, Dwayne. This guy is actually one of the more athletic guys coming out at the position. 91st highest RAS score among over 1,300 players since 1987. So 53% inline rate. He's 6'5", 247 pounds. Doesn't turn 22 in February. I feel like he checks a lot of boxes, albeit maybe doesn't have that one super elite trait we can get excited about.
That's exactly right. Like, he's adequate across a lot of these boxes. So landing spot, is obviously going to be a big thing for him, but primarily used as a short yardage target in college, with 58% of his targets coming between 0 and 9 yards. He was never a target hog, 11% target share for his career. He never enjoyed a big breakout RIPTA season either. Career high of 1.45. That was as a senior. That's, really you're looking for something over a 2. Wasn't anywhere near that. So his adjusted career RIPTA comes in at the 36th percentile, and that's hurting his production rating, which comes in at the 73. But what's boosting it up is when he was targeted, again, back to that complementary metric, looking at career targeted quarterback rating, that came in the 77th percentile at 121.6. So that kind of saves the day for him and keeps it from becoming a really bad production profile to being one that's right there around average. Again, guys, 50 to 100 is the scale we put the rating on. He comes in at a 73. If you look at Lance Zierlein's scouting profile on him, he labels him as a backup with potential to develop into a starter. So his career weighted run block grade of 60 was in the 41st percentile. So right in the range really with some of these other guys that we've already been talking about. But you mentioned his size, some of the things that he might be able to grow into. So this is a guy where only 11% of his comps eventually became top 12 finishers within their first 3 years. So again, we're really more in that dart throw range, but he is the next guy in the model. Closest comps, Brenton Strange, who could make some noise this year, and then Kahel Waring was the other one.
Did average 9 yards after the catch per reception. So maybe if he does find that offense that uses their tight ends a bit more as the check down valves as opposed to the RBs, could have some good things going. But yeah, certainly not exactly jumping off the page in terms of being the most elite prospect in the world. Same can be said for Miami tight end Elijah Arroyo. However, maybe there is a bit more to get excited about here with that peak skill being this guy is fast, Dwayne. Shout out Jacob Gibbs. Great follow over on the old Twitter sphere. But Arroyo actually has the fastest ball carrier time last year of 21.8 miles miles per hour of any tight end in the 2024 NFL or college football season. So did not do athletic testings because he was dealing with a minor injury suffered at the Senior Bowl, quote unquote, just a little bruise, nothing too crazy. Also tore his ACL in 2022, and apparently that was continuing to be an issue in 2023. So again, got to add a little bit of context here, but hey, Dwain, emerging with 590 yards, 7 touchdowns with Cam Ward in the U, did do some good things when he finally had a chance to do so in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, his production rating comes in at a 65 in the model, but you talked about the ACL. So he only played 9 games over his second and third seasons due to that ACL injury. Didn't participate in the NFL Combine, like you mentioned, around the 40 times. So there's a lot of things we don't know ultimately about Victor Arroyo due to the incomplete profile, but we have to go with what we have. And so that production rating does come in at a 65, which is not good. That's the lowest of all 2025 tight ends expected to go within the first 3 rounds. So another player that's a projection pick, adjusted career RIPTA at the 15th percentile, but and this kind of goes along with what you were talking about from Jacob and the on-field speed time being the highest one that we've seen. Career targeted quarterback rating in the 77th percentile at 122.2. So once you combine those two things together, still not great at a 65 production rating, but at least you can look at it and say there was one aspect where he did do really well. And then if you look at the film grade, you look at what we have from Lance Zierlein, he talks about him as being a guy that's, he's confident, he can attack the interior of a defense, very willing as a blocker. He sees him as a guy that can turn into an eventual starter, gave him a grade of 6.24. So the film rating in the supermodel comes in at a 77. So strong speed score. If we could have seen that at his pro day, that would have made me even more exciting, but we kind of have to go on this incomplete profile. There's some guessing. So a lot of this ultimately comes down to his draft capital. So if he ends up going in the 3rd round, that's going to be really good for him. But he is a player that if he slides, obviously it would hurt any player, but this particular type of profile, it would hurt any more. We need to see a team show some confidence in some of those traits they think that he can further develop by taking him probably by round 3 in the NFL draft to feel good about it.
Daniel Jeremiah is 43rd overall prospect, so maybe could even surprise and get into round 2, but otherwise, yeah, it's just going to need someone to really, really fall in love with that speed. Last tight end, Dwain, of course, so everyone can find full write-ups of these players and many more over on fantasylife.com in your, again, fantastic article on all these tight ends. But let's talk Texas tight end Gunnar Helm, who you mentioned TJ Hawkinson being one of the last of the Mohicans. Amazing movie, by the way. Really do see the same thing with Helm because 79% of his snaps did come as an inline tight end last season. And when you do look at what he's able to do with the football in his hands, man, very encouraging prospect here. Just don't look at his speed score because, yeah, my man's was playing through a really nasty looking sprained ankle during the NFL Combine.
Yeah, we did exclude the speed score for Helm in this rating because it just didn't seem fair. Like when you saw the pictures of the ankle, I mean, guys, very black and blue. None of us would have been able to run on that, much less try to put up a good time respective to NFL prospects, right? So gave him a pass there. Was hoping he would be able to run at his pro day, but if you saw those pictures, it's not a surprise that he wasn't able to. We'll see. Maybe Helm finds his way into running somewhere for teams ahead of the NFL draft. If he does, we will update it in the model. But really the big thing here that he's relying on is that film rating. His film rating comes in as a 75 because whenever we look at what he did as far as a production, Ian, it wasn't great. Came in at a 68 rating in the model. If you look at his overall rating for the supermodel, it comes in as a 66. And if you look at this back to 2018, that would be the 46th best tight end. So when you talk about all that, you're like, oh my God, this is really not great. I mean, career adjusted RIPTA, 19th percentile, but another player that when he was targeted, Ian did really well. 134.3 quarterback rating when his quarterbacks looked for Gunnar Helm. So that grades out really well, 86th percentile. Look at his yards per route run. I tried to dig. Whenever we've got some of these players that played behind other good players, played with other good teammates, different things like that. I try to look at things like yards per route run, targets per route run, just for some context. Neither one of those things really helped him out either. 46th percentile in yards per route run, 27th percentile on targets per route run. So you really are relying on the film grade here. I mean, that is just a huge part. And as far as the blocking department goes, this is where inline versus lining up in the slot, it's really tough, how you want to think about this, because his PFF career run blocking grade was a 46.3. That's a 7th percentile score. Now, they were asking him to block defensive ends and edge players, not blocking a safety or potentially a cornerback, where that's going to help your grade, because PFF, the way their grades work, it doesn't necessarily care which one you were trying to block. It's just, did you do your job as a blocker? So overall, we are definitely in dart throw territory here, Ian. 7% of his comps went on to be a top 12. Dalton Schultz, one of your favorite all time. You are the leader of the non-Dalton Schultz fan club. And then Ian Thomas was his other comp in the rookie supermodel.
Shout out Ian Thomas, sharing one of the best names that we've ever seen out here. But Dwayne, that's going to wrap it up. I do appreciate you doing your job again. Another fantastic supermodel. Everyone check that out at fantasylife.com. We'll be back here on the Fantasy Life Show with much more throughout the week. Always appreciate your guys' support. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.